I'm Geoff Barraclough. I've spent the last 10 years working in the merchant acquiring industry. I worked for Evo the last 7 years in Poland, Spain, Germany, Czech Republic, and so on, building our European payment business and spending a lot of time dealing with software vendors of various kinds and building the ISV practice at Evo. Before I was involved with payments, I worked for a software company, supplied software to the retail industry. It would be now what we would call an ISV, although we didn't call it an ISV at the time. So I've had a foot in both camps. And I'm going to take this from a slightly different perspective. So rather than talk about embedded payments from the customer experience, I'm going to talk about how payment companies and software companies can collaborate and how they can produce a winning result, because it's not straightforward. Payment companies and software companies are completely different. I mentioned I'd left Evo. What I do now is I write a blog and a newsletter called The Business of Payments. Please all sign up. And then in my spare time, I come and speak at conferences like this one. I realized that photograph from 3 or 4 years ago, I'm actually wearing exactly the same suit and shirt. So that way you can always recognize me, because I always look the same. So that's why I'm here. The question is, well, why are you here? And I think you're here because cloud has completely turbocharged the software market, particularly the small business software market. We're seeing adoption of software as a service by small businesses at roughly 50% in the US. For retail, roughly 2/3 for restaurants. Restaurants like them more because restaurants have got lots of integrations that they have to do now into booking systems and table management and so on. And that is making the interface between payments and software completely different to how it used to be. When I worked in software, we hated payments. We had to provide payments because our customers demanded it, but we couldn't make any money. All it was cost, and it brought lots of service calls. Every time the payment service went down, the merchants would call us and complain, and we were like, well, actually, it's the payment service went down, not our software. But they felt it was our responsibility. What's different with cloud is payments becomes a critical part of the customer experience, and even more importantly, a way for software companies to make money. And you can see the graph I've put here. This is from the McKinsey Merchant Acquiring Survey in the US. But over roughly 1/3 of retail merchants in the US now have what they call a fintech ISV. So that means a software provider which is also providing payments in this modern way. We're talking ECR software, we're talking e-commerce platform software, custom management software, and so on. So cloud's turbocharged the market and delivered huge amounts of value to the ISVs, the software providers that have taken advantage of that. Let's look at Shopify. 1.75 million merchants and $200 billion of goods sold over its platform in 2022. It's got integrated payments. Shopify Pay is the German service you see on the slide there, in partnership with Stripe. Now, Shopify Payments now processes over half of the payments for its merchants. That has brought Stripe about 800,000 merchants and about $100 billion of payment processing without Stripe having to do very much work. So it's great news for Stripe. Or is it? Because Stripe have had to give away roughly half of the net revenue to Shopify. Great news for Shopify, they get a ton of money for not doing very much work. Great news for the customers. Bad news for you, the people in the audience, because those 800,000 merchants are off limits to the people in this audience. That $100 billion of payment volume, also off limits to the people in this audience. And because Shopify is now taxing at 1% all purchases that are not made with Shopify payments, there's a strong incentive for all their merchants to migrate to Shopify payments. Again, closing off more revenue to the people in this audience. So without those partnerships with software vendors, significant amounts of merchants are not available to us. It's not just e-commerce. There are many other verticals that are taking advantage of this. Here's 2 good examples from Europe. Guest Pay, which is a hotel management software company, sells in the UK and in Germany, has produced, Guest Line is the name of the company. Guest Pay is the solution, which is in conjunction with Trust Payments. And Dotty Pay, which is from Dotty Kashka, a leading Czech vendor of retail and hospitality software to small businesses, who are working with First Data to produce Dotty Pay. They've both seen what Shopify have been doing and want a slice of the action. Again, if you're not partnering with these companies, selling your services to their merchants is going to be very, very difficult, if not impossible. Not just a question of money, of course. Bringing together payments and software can allow a better customer experience, as GuestPay points out there. And what that's also doing is extending the buying behavior of merchants. So they're buying payments now the way they buy software. And if you look at the small business owner today, the small business owners are generally millennials. They're time poor. They are stressed. They're really struggling with this omni-channel business. Implications, their buying behavior for software is more like their buying behavior in their personal lives. They want self-service. They want ratings and reviews. Critically, they do not want to wait for a sales rep to call. And if you look at the chart on the right-hand side, key considerations for buying software, number one is it works with the stuff I've got already. Because you're a small business owner, you've got 4 or 5 different business processes. They've all got different software. If you're going to buy anything new, critical consideration it buys works with what you've got already. I've just changed my bank account for my business. Why? Because my old bank account didn't work with my software. Most important thing is what software do I use? I'm going to take a payment service that works with the software that I've bought. And that means there's a radical shift in payment buying behavior. So this is WooCommerce. This is another leading software for small businesses. They've got about 7 million customers worldwide. If you've got a WordPress blog, this is how you turn it into a transactional website. This is the German service from WooCommerce. They've got some great payment options for you. They've got Molly, they've got Klarna, they've got Braintree, they've got Stripe. They've got some good payment options. But you've just bought WooCommerce because you think it's going to help you run your business. Which payment service are you going to choose? You're going to choose this one. You're going to choose WooPay. Why? Because it's the only payment service which is fully integrated into WooCommerce. That one line does the sale. You're going to buy that one. Now, that's great news for Stripe, because that's also Stripe in disguise. But it's also bad news for Stripe, because if you'd hit the Stripe button to the right of that, they'd be getting full margin. You hit that button, they're getting half margin. But none of you can sell to these people because they've already bought that service. So a radical change in buying behavior. Partnerships between payment service providers and software industry is challenging. And the reason why it's challenging is, as I put it, payments are from Mars and software is from Venus, right? So on the right-hand side, there is Mars. Mars has signed the contract and done the integration, and he thinks it's now time to go to sleep because the merchants are going to roll in, the payment volume is going to roll in. His job is done. He can take a snooze. And Venus is the software company on the left-hand side going, well, hang on a minute. I want more from this relationship. I want some engagement. I want some after-sales service. I want more from the payment company. The payment company's fallen asleep, done the business, wants to move on to the next software company. This has got to be a long-term relationship for both sides. Because they're very different companies. Payment processors and retail software vendors are completely different animals. If I just take the first 3 of those, payment software companies are hugely customer and vertically focused. When I worked in the software business, all I thought about was the vertical I was in, and the customers we had my mobile phone number. I work in the payment business, I never meet a customer, right? Because we're all far too busy thinking about regulation, which is the second big challenge here. We all think about regulation and compliance all the time. It's absolutely top of our agenda. The software industry doesn't understand the meaning of the word compliance or of regulation. They sell software all over the world. You just get a credit card, you buy it, they don't care. The idea that when we come along and say, oh, actually, we can't provide a payment service in Jersey because it's one of the Channel Islands and our UK or European license doesn't apply there, they're like, what? We're going to sell it anyway. So challenging partnerships because they have very different industries. There are 3 broad models of partnerships that tend to be used between software providers and payment companies. The obvious one is lead referral, where the software company simply sends across to the payment company a lead form. This is the company we've sold our software to. This is the name and address, roughly what they're like. Payment companies will pay money for that. They'll pay an ongoing margin forever for one of those sales leads. It's really quite good value for the amount of work you have to do. But the customer experience is terrible. because as a software company, you don't know what's happened. You've sent the lead off. Maybe the payment company will sell the deal. Maybe they won't. You've no idea what's going to happen there. Or you can be a reseller or an ISO, where as a software company, you sell the payment service, but the merchant signs the contract with the payment service provider. So that gives you much higher margin because you've done more work. You've sold the service. You're in control of the sales process and the onboarding, which is great. That's really helpful. But you're not really in control of the customer experience down the line. And the merchant ownership is really unclear, particularly when these partnerships break up. It's not clear in the merchant's mind or in the mind of the actors who actually owns this customer, who is the relationship with, who actually is in charge. Or you can go the whole way and become a payment facilitator, and essentially the software company becomes a payment institution, handles compliance, handles risk, handles the customer experience. It's great for providing a really good experience to the end users. However, it's expensive and it's risky. Roughly $1 million to set it up, and you need a payment institution license. And if you're a startup, you can't get any payment service provider to take you seriously. The number of calls we used to get from startups saying, I want to be a PF, and we're like, seriously? I haven't heard of you. But the amount of margin you can make is considerable. If you take €100,000 a month, €100,000 a year merchant, and maybe 50 basis points of net revenue, you're making $30 a month, or €30 a month as a PF. Now, if you consider that a typical small business software vendor is selling software at between $30 to $50 a month, it's interesting. It can almost double your revenue and more than double your profit. But there's a lot of investment to be done first. Now, where do these relationships go wrong? Because they do go wrong. I've put down 4 things here in my experience in the industry of where these relationships go wrong. The first one is it's quite often to find they're set up with commercial terms incentivizing bad behavior. We really recommend that these partnerships are built with a P&L. Both sides put all their costs into the partnership, sales and marketing and training, and that way everybody's incentivized to grow the relationship and keep merchants on board and keep merchants processing lots of volume. Second thing is, oh my, bad onboarding processes. There's nothing software vendors hate more than when they've sold the deal and then the merchant calls up and says, well, it's been a week. What's happened to my payments? And it's, oh, it's stuck in the KYC process of our payment provider. Terrible. Or even worse, the merchant eventually gets rejected by the payment provider because it fails the risk or credit checks, right? That's all got to be done up front immediately, and you've got to be up front with the software companies to say, this is our risk policy. Send us merchants like this and not like that. Compliance. I mentioned that software companies don't understand the meaning of the word, so you have to train them. And that's not a question of putting compliance in the T's and C's. It's got to be in 25-point type on a PowerPoint slide, and you've got to sit the execs of the software company down and say, this is what you have to do, and this is what you shouldn't be doing. And finally, roadmaps. We're all global. A lot of the payment companies are very big. They're very global. They're driven by lots of different factors, different markets, regulations, big customers. It's quite hard for us to commit to roadmaps, but if you're a software company, quite often you need the capability of being promised by your payment provider in order to launch the next release of your software. It's critical that those are aligned and people stick to their promises. I've put on here a marketing campaign we did in the UK when we set up Evo UK, and these are the geeks. So we decided that we wanted to be make it clear to software companies that we looked after our business and they looked after their business. And so these characters would then inform the software companies about the industry. So that's Eugene, the big guy at the top. And when Eugene sent out our PCI emails, we got twice as more open rate as when they came from our PCI manager. So being able to be clear that you're on the side of the customer, on the side of the merchant, really helps in terms of generating a stronger communications. And finally, we may tackle this on the panel, but this is creating significant differences in business models, right? Will software eat payments or will payments eat software? Well, I mentioned the kind of Shopify, DottyPay idea of the ISV providing a payment service. There's another idea that I've seen recently in the UK. There's 2 examples of this, Access and ClearCourse, where private equity guys are buying lots of software companies, and they're migrating the payments onto a common payment platform and using the extra margin to finance buying more software companies. So payments becomes the revenue synergy that drives software consolidation. It's fascinating. Alternatively, from a PSP perspective, we all want to become more developer friendly. Adyen and Stripe are doing brilliantly at that, and I'm sure Checkout is. The guy from Checkout's coming on the panel later on. But many payment companies are buying software companies. Global Payments has spent hundreds of millions of dollars in the US buying software companies. Fantastic. Locks down distribution. At least for new customers, it's quite hard to move old customers across. But there's limited cost synergies between software and payments, different sales forces, different platforms, capital allocation all over the place, and you're competing potentially with a huge partner universe that now won't work with you. You've bought a hotel software company. All the other hotel software companies are not going to want to process payments with you. You're a competitor. Alternatively, maybe payment companies write their own software, as we've seen with Clover. It's been successful, I'll give them that. But again, it's a different business, very different business. So will payments eat software? Will software eat payments? Or will it be a bit of both? Will Mars triumph? Will it be Venus? Will their relationship end happily or not? And we can discuss that in the panel. Thank you very much.